So what we do, the identity comes in and grabs everything. I did this, I did that, whether it's a win or a loss. And that happens just an absolute tiny fraction of a second behind reality. Well, it's simple fact, and it's very it's reductible. You can work your way back from what you just said back to the facts, and this work really is about facts. If you really look at everything, which is rare, you'll discover that the I doesn't exist separately. Okay, and we probably don't have time to go right through that now. But if you can just accept that premise, and that if you did the work intently, you would discover that each time you kept dropping in layer by layer. But the first thing is to realize that everything you said there was conditioning. So there's two factors that we call the ego. It's your conditioning, your culture, your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, your extended family, the street you're on, your neighbours, the school you went to, the suburb, the earth. Right? And then there's what you came in with, what was born into the body, and or what arose in the body. And that's obvious when you see identical twins with identical upbringings, and they can have very, very different personalities. Yeah? So the combination of those two things are what we call the I, the ego, the me, and which was everything you were saying there. How do I, what do I, how do I feel good about myself, and all the rest of it. Well, that's all patterning. Who's there to feel good or bad about it? And just if you can just understand this is the patterning I currently have at this moment, and when I was making my mistakes and successes in the past, that was the current patterning I had then, which is either evolving, we could say, if we can use that word, or de-evolving, like lack of self-awareness, lack of inner investigation would be a de-evolution. And evolution would be, okay, well, that really didn't do well. This person's hurt, that person's hurt, this harm has happened. Okay, what happened there? How was I, or how was my patterning, can we say, if we use that word for I? How was that involved? And is there a better way to do that next time, for example? And so we evolve. We're causing less harm in the world. Karmically, we're cleaning up. We're not damaging further and further karma, creating further and further karma, more accurately, right? And so we naturally start to clean up, and the idea of the I and the patterns clean up. And eventually what you entered with there isn't really a factor anymore, because it's obviously, oh gosh, what a crappy pattern that is, instead of woe is me. Right? And it's just understood as the pattern. Yeah? Instead of the identity. So what we do, the identity comes in and grabs everything. I did this, I did that, whether it's a win or a loss. And that happens just an absolute tiny fraction of a second behind reality. Because any cognition and any discussion, and anything that is said and brought into the world had to go through some sort of processing. Like, even if it's a millisecond, it's still not completely now. Right? It's just not possible. So everything that's interactive and conveyed is outside of reality, just by a smidgen. And reality is actually just the dead silence and stillness of what is now, prior to the arcing up of mind. I'm not talking about the mind that's just cognizing here. I'm talking about the thoughts and emotionality and the reactions and that side of things. So people talk about now and getting into now, but really there's actually, like, it's finer and more and more, finer and finer and finer. So it actually, that's an ongoing process too. And at some point, you know, you'll have, if this was pursued, and with some grace, I guess we could say, even just moving your finger gets seen as unnecessary at some point. And breathing, it doesn't matter. Life or death doesn't matter. It's all one thing, and this is just an aspect of that flow, if that makes sense. But that's where it goes. But that might be a bit much for now. But it's not a unpleasant or difficult discovery, it's a blissful discovery. It's freedom. So it's not a problem. The world becomes challenging at times because there's so much going on that's unnecessary. And you see so much of the suffering at some point that's just absolutely unnecessary. It's based in the mistaken ego coming in and grabbing simple patterning. Were you born and raised in a village in China, you'd have a completely different set of patterning. But you still have the original source, but you'd be acting back very differently. And your eye would have a different set of problems, quote unquote. But really, it's just patterning. Does that make sense? So your whole premise was started in the wrong place. The I is real. The separate I is real. And we only have a few minutes here, really. So it's not a tiny subject. So if that's a little bit incomprehensible, perhaps more research on the subject would help with that. Yeah, rather than me try and unfold all that in a few minutes. Yeah. So that can be disturbing when you hear that. If we do have a lot of identification, some of the things I say can be disturbing. And that reaction, that very reaction, is a part of the problem. And so we start hunting our reactivity. You don't have to agree with what's being said, but the reactivity is a problem, right? And you'll see a lot of problems in the modern era that reactivity is becoming more important than facts. And so everything gets out of kilter.